Hello coaches, welcome back to another Modern Soccer Coach interview. This week we are joined by Jaymes Monte at StatsBomb. He's written a brilliant article and this is a great topic on ThrowIns. Highly recommend you check out the article. I will put the link below and we're going to talk about the data around throw-ins. Are we potentially missing an opportunity with possession-based teams to get more from throw-ins? Not necessarily just a long throw. Brilliant topic. Hope you enjoy it. Please give it a like. Please subscribe. Please give it a rating on iTunes as well. It would mean a lot. Thank you so much for the support. Please check out the resources on modernsoccercoach.com. Here is Jaymes. Enjoy. Jaymes, thanks so much for joining me today on the Modern Soccer Coach podcast. Really excited to have you on.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, we had Thomas Gronemark on a few years ago, but it wasn't specifically around data and throw-ins. So this one is of an article that you did on StatsBomb, and I'll make sure I put the article below, and I urge everyone to read it. It is coach friendly. It's not just about numbers. You've done a great job. I said your writing's very good and kind of appeals to the coach. So let's talk about this. And my opinion is that it is overlooked quite a bit. Even mainstream media, as we've gone to you watch a game, XG, possession numbers, all those figures come up. Never, ever does throw in percentages, does throw in what numbers, nothing comes up. Why do you think that is at this stage of the game where there's so much of it?
I guess it comes to the point that they're generally, for want of a better phrase, they're kind of throwaway parts of the game. You kind of, as a throw in, you get the ball back and play and let's get on with what we're doing type thing. Whereas I think we're seeing more and more as with the sort of evolution of set piece coaches and that sort of emphasis on that side of the game. Now we're starting to see teams take more interest and apply more time aside in training to work on things around set pieces. Obviously, corners and free kicks probably dominate that, but then the throw-in side of it is coming into it more and more now.
Yeah, it is a fascinating aspect of kind of the growth. Something that you touch on in the article is, which I actually, to be honest, never thought of from a data perspective, is this aspect of possession versus the Rory Delap direct throw. I'll refer to Rory Delap 100 times in this interview, just because that's where my head goes. So, can you talk a little bit about how teams and how you kind of objectively measure throw-in success? Is it a goal? Is it the first ball being received, or how deep would you go into this?
Yeah, I think that's kind of what I was trying to get to with the crux of the article is not for throw-ins specifically, or things like throw-ins, like creating a chance immediately from them is not necessarily always the primary goal. Within a game, if you're looking to quantify a game by data, you use XG, you use shots, you use the final score as a data point for. It's quite a clear outcome that you want to achieve. Whereas I think when it comes to throw-ins and you get a bit more nuance, not everyone's trying to do the same thing from throw-ins. So the point of the article was to try and sort of highlight that there's many ways to quantify success from a throw-in. So some teams legitimately want to just throw it into the box and create a chance from the throw-in. Others will want to get the ball back into play and back into the regular sort of set up, open play phase of play. So I think, yeah, it's about, before you measure whether you're being successful at throw-ins, you need to define what success is to you from a throw-in. And then from that, you can start building a framework around your analysis to then say, okay, we're doing this better this game than we were this game, and we can monitor things over the season.
I think that the article does a really good job in that and kind of provoking you as a coach to think, as you say, a little bit deeper beyond defining, again, where your head goes probably in the last few years has been someone on your team who has a long throw, and immediately a coach would get excited about that there. But there's levels to that, and I think the article does a really good job on that there, where it's like, okay, so you need second balls, knockdowns, positioning, and aspects like that there. In terms of that long throw, can you talk a little bit about like what you've kind of saw with the research with the traditional Rory Delap throw?
Yeah, I think one of the big takeaways from I kind of went into writing that article quite blind about throw-ins to an extent around outcomes and what happens. There's a clear if you've got a guy who can launch it into the box or women who can launch it in the box, then there's definitely an upside of the chance creation and the XG creation that you can get from that. And I think if you've got that tool, it'd be silly not to use it to an extent. It's not to say every time you get the ball and attack and throw in the final third, you have to chuck it in the box. And it's not as simple as just chucking it into the box. But I think if you've got that in your armory, it makes sense to at least try and maximize that.
Do you know what's funny? Whenever, and it might just be a bias or it might just be my point of view that I look at the world, but when you have a long throw, person with a long throw, again, everyone gets kind of excited and sees that as a massive opportunity. And if you didn't have that, it would be a lot harder to score from that kind of traditional attack and throw in the final third. But people don't really spend the same amount of emphasis on the corner taker quality, where they think, all right, well, we'll do the routine, but you don't actually look at the service. How much of it do you think goes down to, and this is a really broad question, so apologies, but how much of it do you think goes down to that piece of the patterns of, like, how much do you need a system around the target player, the knockdown, the movement, all those other variables as well?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think if you've got a long thrower, you can probably get away with, to an extent, doing less, because chuck it in the box and the chaos that ensues will naturally create some chances for you. If you haven't got the long throw and you've just got a sort of mid-range throw, if you like, you're probably going to need to be a little bit more creative in your routines and your patterns of play, I guess, that lead up to creating chances from these throw-ins. So yeah, I think certainly the tools that you've got at your disposal dictate a little bit around what you can do. But then to the flip side, if you've got a long throw into the box, you don't want to waste that by just chucking it in there and hoping for the best. There's definitely something there to work with, and then it's probably like a chicken and egg type thing of what do you do first? Do you work with the throw and taker to create these? I'm waffling a bit here, but getting the ball in the box is going to naturally create chaos and chances, and then from that you can develop routines, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, it's interesting because, again, the Delap thing, I think, got so much scrutiny because of Delap's throw. And then from a coach, you're thinking, if I had that, but when you're working with teams, then you don't really appreciate the fact that, yeah, if the centre back, it's pretty obvious to know when a long throw's happening as well. So if they have a centre back that can deal with that,
yeah, the Delap thing as well. My mind always goes back to Delap as well, but I think I don't know if it's just sort of, what's the word? A bias of sort of a success bias type thing that's coming out. But I go back to that and I think of the chances that they created, but they were obviously a long ball team under Tony Pulis, and they had that all going on. And at the time, I don't think there was many other long throws, or certainly not as prominent as Delap was. Whereas now you have your Brentfords and your Sheffield Uniteds from last season that were thrown into the box, and it seems a bit more measured and a bit more like, this is what we're trying to do with the long throw, rather than just chucking it in there. When Delap was as prime, I think it was just a case of chuck it in the mixer and we've got some big guys that can deal with it.
Yeah, he also had Peter Crouch. I'm not sure if that had any correlation with it, but it kind of moving back a bit now. And again, the article, you talk about there's a Premier League table on XG per throw, and I thought this was fascinating. Because I always assume with any table in success that the top teams are doing, like, leading the way in set piece, leading the way in possession, leading the way in chance creation. But you have City at the bottom of it, and it's like, oh, I City don't have a long throw, but then it goes XG per throw, so it's the what you have, and correct me if I'm wrong here, what you basically get from the throw in the chain of like a similar XG assisted. But Arsenal are up there, and City are way down there, and those are two similar styles. So first of all, am I right in that kind of definition? Then second of all, why is Arsenal way ahead of City?
Yeah, you're pretty much right. So StatsBomb data has a set piece model that underpins it, and how that then calculates the XG from throw-in is whether the phase of play is still in the throw-in sort of phase of play as determined by the model. And there's a few factors that go into that. It's location of the ball, time, various things. So yeah, so there's a model that underpins it, and models by definition are debatable. There's decisions made with what goes into the model and what doesn't go into the model. So you could probably sit down and watch 100 throw-in clips, and there'd be 5 edge cases where you'd be like, oh, that should be a throw-in, and it's not classed as a throw-in phase of play. But essentially, yeah, there's a cut-off point from the throw-in to some point after it, as determined by a number of factors that says it's still in throw-in phase of play or not in throw-in phase of play. So going back to your question about Arsenal and City, I think that probably the easiest takeaway from that is that Arsenal are doing something after the throw-in that gets the ball into the box and creates a chance quicker than what City would. City are probably more likely to recycle the ball, and whether it's move it across to the other side of the pitch, whether it's to just get back into their sort of standard shape or whatever it might be. So yeah, you're right in what you're saying, that it's quite interesting that there's a difference between them, given that they're fairly similar styles of play. But without sitting and watching every single Arsenal throw-in, the data suggests that they're doing something a little bit quicker following attacking third throw-ins to get a chance in on goal.
Well, we'll talk a little bit about speculation about what potentially teams are doing. It seems like anytime you see Arsenal, and obviously Guardiola's at the forefront of coaching and tactics and all that great stuff. But when you see Arsenal, there's a lot of work being done. Even in the documentary, you see some 1v work being done. You see some shot clock stuff being done. So, it's obviously a quite data-centric club as well. So perhaps they're just looking at saying, yeah, they're looking at getting what you're saying there is maybe a shorter time to take advantage of a throw-in, whereas City are using it in a circulation type way.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, without sort of having watched every single throw-in and taking the sort of video feedback from that, the data certainly suggests that they're doing things either a little bit more quickly following a attacking throw-in, or a little bit more directly in terms of when they get a chance from the subsequent phase of play after the throw-in.
All right. Definition time, OBV you talk about, and then XG assisted. Give us the breakdown of where kind of OBV is different from XG metric.
Yeah, so XG is obviously a measurement of chance creation. So every shot on goal will have an XG value. Where that differs from OBV is OBV values every action on the pitch. So whether that be a pass or a dribble or a tackle or a shot, everything has an OBV value. So when we're looking at measuring throw-in XG, if we have a phase of play where throwing down the line, ball into the box, ball goes right across the 6-yard box, but nobody gets a shot away, that's not going to get an XG value because there's no shot at the end of that. Whereas using OBV allows you to measure everything that builds up to the place where the shot didn't occur. So because you've done a lot of good work in that build-up, you've got the ball into a very good area, but don't get a shot away, you're still getting you're still getting a value from the OBV model that kind of assigns positive, negative connotations from that.
So kind of tying into that there, this 5-second aspect of OBV that you talk about with second balls, that's not necessarily do they get a chance in second balls. That's more or less, can they move the opposition with second balls? Is that more specific, or is that accurate?
Yeah, the 5-second thing was fairly arbitrary decision from me, and when I was pulling this data together, it was kind of just another example of how you can measure success from your throw-in. I mean, there's a fairly legitimate argument that you could extend that 5 seconds to 10 seconds and look at the results there. You could use the phase of play model that we talked about earlier and just look at the OBV values within that. Yeah, 5 second was just I wanted to see how quickly teams were moving the ball into more dangerous areas, and I wanted to remove the element of having to get a shot away at the end of it. So yeah, it is a short time window, but it's just a sort of decision around, again, coming back to what I was kind of saying at the start. You define if you one of your KPIs, I guess, of throw-ins is to say we want to quickly create chances within 5 seconds of an attacking throw-in, then that might be a good marker. But if you're happy to be a little bit more measured, say 10 seconds might be fine. Maybe if we looked at that for Man City and Arsenal, if we extended that to 20 seconds, perhaps that's where Man City and Arsenal start to level out, because the Man City doing things a little bit more further down the possession chain, if that makes sense.
Yeah, another aspect you talked about, which was probably my favorite part of the article, because I'm a big believer in it, is switching a play, and some teams using the throw-in to switch. Like, again, without seeing a massive sample size or without knowing what goes on behind the scenes, I took a look at Liverpool a couple of years ago when Thomas was there, and with the lens of every time they would throw in, there must be something deliberate being done here. And I noticed that even a ball bounced back from the thrower back to Trent Alexander-Arnold, and you see that there's a whole compilation of this where he's volleying the ball across the pitch blindly to Robertson on the far side. Without, that's not really, like, that's two passes. So I guess where it's not an extreme amount of possession, how would you look at that from a data perspective?
Yeah, I guess there's a number of ways you could look at. You could literally just look at how often the ball moves from the throw-in side to the other side within whatever time frame or whatever number of passes. You mentioned 2 passes there. It could be that. It could be we want it on the other side within 4 seconds. You can also measure. So one of the metrics that StatsBomb collects is ball receipts in space. So you might want to look and say, okay, how often do we get the ball from Trent out to Andy Robertson when he's in space? So there's no good moving it to him if he's got a man on him, and that doesn't really achieve our goal. But how often can we move the ball from one side of the pitch to the other and find a winger attack and full back in X amount of space? And that could be your measurement of success in that instance.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I didn't know StatsBomb had that receipts of space.
All receipts in space, so you can effectively measure the volume, the area of space around a player receiving the ball. So that could be, you could say 5. You can also set parameters on that. So you could say I want them to be within 5 yards of space or 10 yards of space or whatever you want to measure.
This is a stupid question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Time on throws. Do you think if someone takes a quick throw, you've more chance of success? Or I know there's a big middle ground here where you could be setting something up. Or if someone takes too long, options dry up. Like, do you think there's any that would be an interesting piece to go down? Or do you think I'm completely wasting my time with it?
I think subjectively, I definitely agree. Like, if I'm watching my team on a Saturday or Sunday, I want quick throw-ins all the time. And I don't know if that's just something that's built in from watching football as a kid or not. And it's a difficult one to quantify in data because especially with event data, there's many unknowns. You don't know what the setup is around you, what the sort of phase of play is when the ball goes out and things like that. But certainly, like, if you're in an attacking phase and the ball goes out and you can get the ball back in play quickly, like, subjectively, I always find that something that excites me as a fan and wants to see it. I think there's also, Emma, going back a little bit to what we were talking about before around chaos. Like, if you're quicker to take a throw in, you're more likely to catch the opposition, the defending team, off guard and help you create that chaos. And I think that's what set pieces can be good at. They can create a bit of chaos in the opposition because you know what you're doing, whereas the opposition are somewhat reactive to your movement. So I think by taking more time and slowing it down, you give the opposition more time to get back into their shape and back into their usual setup and deal with whatever's coming. So I don't have any data to back any of that up, but that's just a general opinion I have.
It's a good pub chat, as one of my friends uses that term. The space is obviously a big thing, and when I'm thinking about this and reading your article and thinking about the questions, I'm thinking, right, with space, like, it's all about, if you take a quick throw, you get space. It's about obviously the the receipt metric there that you talked about, which I didn't even know about, this space, you have a great visual on how teams, and I'll put it up here, how teams use space, which are almost like a heat map. Can you talk about how that data is kind of worked out with that area?
Yeah, so that's going back to what we were just talking about there about the measurement of space around a player when they receive a ball. So the heat map effectively is depicting where teams are receiving the ball with more space and where they're receiving the ball with less space. I think one of the takeaways I had was that I think Sheffield United, off the top of my head, was one that had a lot of ball receipts in space around the sort of middle area of the pitch. Yeah, they're one of the teams with the longest throws and throwing it into the box most often. And I think that also kind of speaks to what we were talking about there. Is like, although the defending team are going to be set up to defend the longer throw, that then gives you other opportunities for the shorter throw to find someone a bit deeper in space. And I guess to counter what we were saying about the quick throw, if you make a quick throw, if you're Sheffield United, maybe there's not the space there. But if you take the time and everyone gets in the box and waits for the longer throw, then maybe the space appears somewhere else on the pitch. And I guess it's about finding that balance a little bit.
It's fascinating when you start looking at it a lot deeper. You start to, again, it's a kind of Pandora's box. You get 20 more questions to yourself. Yeah. One of the pieces, again, speculation you put in the article was Brighton and Brighton style and De Zerbi. And part of me thinks, De Zerbi, I think, challenged coaches in a lot of ways about space as well, where he saw maximizing opportunities where there was congested areas as an opportunity. And again, we could take this the two different ways. Pure speculation. Are they working on it? Do they value it? Or maybe he sees that as, if we can play out of a 10 by 10 box around the penalty area, we can play out of a 20 by 30 box around the pitch. Like, again, speculation. What do you feel about Brighton's work in this area?
Yeah, when you mentioned this question before we came online, and I had to doubt myself about the De Zerbi thing, and I went looking in Google. I was trying to find a definitive thing that says he doesn't work on set pieces, and there's not really anything there. There's a couple of clips of him saying that he's not particularly focused on set pieces, I guess, but that comment or that reference in my article kind of came back from work that we've done at StatsBomb, myself and other guys there that worked on various projects and looking at De Zerbi teams and their set piece output's always been sort of middle to poor in his time at Brighton, and it's Sassuolo before that. So it was kind of just something that was in the back of my mind that we discovered that his team's never really shone for traditional set piece measurement metrics. But that's not to say, going back to what I was talking about earlier, that there's other intentions from his set pieces. So yeah, again, it's all coming back to like, it depends what you want to do from set pieces. There's no right or wrong here. It's about measuring what you're trying to do. Yeah.
Wouldn't it be great to be such a brilliant manager that you can say publicly that you're not really worried about set pieces? Like in 2024, that would be, you're never getting hired if you say that,
Yeah, exactly. Now you've got to be into everything.
Let's bring it back a little bit, because I think this is a really good topic and something that we don't really talk about as a coaching community. Is like, okay, we're talking about data, and the data is outstanding, and the work that StatsBomb do about progressing conversations in this area, I think, has been phenomenal over the last few years. But I think there's still this kind of thought process around coaches where, hey, listen, I don't have a StatsBomb membership, or I don't have a big amount of budget to spend on data. But you talked before about coaching your son's under 11 team, even with the thought of what you're trying to do from a throw-in or maybe little areas of like, this is how it's measured. I'm sure that can transfer to grassroots level to where you just think about the game a little bit differently. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, throw-ins are difficult because the reasons we discussed before, they're kind of like a second thought within games and whatnot. But And you can sometimes come away from if I'm coaching my son's team, you come away and you're like, you won't remember any throw-ins in the game. There's been 25, 35, 45 throw-ins, and you'll remember one of them where you kind of got in behind the defence or something like that. So I think you're relying, at grassroots, you're a little bit more reliant on subjective assessment, I guess. But that's not to say there isn't an advantage there. And I know it myself, like we have two 1 hour training sessions a week where they're not an elite team. They're a good team, but they're not an elite team. And you have to choose what to work on. And it's like, do I spend 20 minutes working on throw-ins, or do I get them in their shape, or moving the ball about, or training certain drills that are going to have more of an impact on the game? So I think that's where like this whole conversation around the article I wrote has been focused on Premier League teams. And it's easy to prioritize throw-ins maybe once a week, once a month, twice a month, if you've got that sort of resources and you've got that time to work with players. As you go down the food chain, so to speak, resources and time become less in it. I can see why throw-ins get pushed to one side. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, see, I disagree. The more I read articles like this, the more I think resources that are low, then creativity and solutions have to be higher. So where, I look now at session design a lot, not just because of this article, but I think it confirms to me is like, okay, if we're measuring this now, it's obviously got value, but how many possession exercises, even from a tactical 11v11, 11v10, start from a coach kicking a ball to someone? Could that not start with a throw-in?
Yeah. And I think, like, although we're saying nobody's really got time to work on it or whatever, but if you're the team that does find 20 minutes a week or 20 minutes every couple of weeks to work on throw-ins in your session, you're probably going to see a difference within your, if nobody else is doing it, then that's where we talk about marginal gains and all that sort of stuff, but maybe it's a little bit more than marginal at grassroots because literally nobody else is doing it. If you're the one team out of your 12-team league that can spend a bit of time on that, then it can make quite a big difference at times.
Could you subjectively, let's just say you draw a line on the pitch and you get your video or whatever it is that you're recording the match on, and you go through it and you analyze it and you take, how many throw-ins in a youth game? It's probably actually a high amount, probably 30, 40, 50. And taking those down and doing a little bit of, maybe if it's attacking wise, doing get diagram, line the pitch, chart it out, count it.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly ways you could monitor it if you've got the time to sit down and watch the game back and effectively chalk up successful outcomes from your throw-ins just from watching the video. Then I think that there's definitely ways you can record that, and it's the same as what the big clubs will be doing, but you're just having to do a bit more work about it yourself. But trying to get the ball into a certain area within 5 seconds of a throw-in or whatever it might be. There's ways to measure it if you've got the time and the resources to do it.
Yeah, well, we'll kind of go into the other end of the spectrum now and flipping the time and resources. And let's say, you are a professional team, but not at the level of Champions League where you have kind of expertise alongside the data, which is kind of what I see. Let's just say you've got data, and as you know, like I've worked with StatsBomb, or I previously worked with StatsBomb for a few years, and you're telling me 2 or 3 metrics that I didn't know even existed, because they're growing it every year and they're pushing out more and more. But there comes a challenge as a coach to be, how much data is too much data? Like, you can't focus in a workflow. You can't focus on a week on everything. So I guess, how would you recommend that the coach who, in a lot of levels today, they might not admit it, but are kind of being introduced to the volume of data at an earlier stage, how would you navigate around that, or how would you advise them to do that?
Yeah, I think my thoughts on that is to try and pull back a bit, not getting into the intricacies. Maybe you don't want to measure the throw-in. You want to measure it every game, but maybe you don't want to look after every game, say, okay, this is the XG we created from a throw-in. You don't want to look at that game by game by game. Take it back, look at it on a 10 game by 10 game block and say, okay, over this first part of the season, we didn't work on throw-ins as much. Now we've gone into the second part of the season, we've started working on throw-ins. are our numbers going up? Are we achieving more? So rather than like, I agree, you can get bogged down in looking at too many numbers and you can look at them too often. But if you can do like a quarterly or a 5-game review and sort of pick up trends that are related to things that you might have been working on, and if you've been working on throw-ins for an hour a week for a 5-week period and nothing's changed on your throw-in numbers, then either the work that you're doing is not up to scratch, or you might want to just bin it off and focus on something else. So there's no point in banging away at it if things are not turning around, or you can't keep doing the same thing over and over. You need to change what your drills are, what your techniques are around throw-ins to try and pick those numbers up. But looking at one game by one game is maybe a bit too focused in, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think this is a really fascinating topic, because this is part of where I see, talk about marginal gains, even if it's that, I think there's a bigger piece on the pie on the table where, in 5 years, I think mainstream everyone will have access to almost the same amount of data. And then all of a sudden, like, okay, well, what's going to separate? Surely it's not the volume of staff, Jaymes. Surely there's going to be tricks to 100%. Being skillful. What do you think in that area?
Yeah, 100%. I think that's what we're seeing generally in football and data. That a few years back, 4 or 5 years back, just having data was an advantage. Now everyone's got data. Now it's about how you use the data and how smart you are with it, and not getting bogged down in the. If you can have an analyst that can bring you the key takeaways as a coach, then that's the skill of it, I think, and knowing how to interpret it and knowing how to pick apart the different elements of it. And I think, again, coming back to the sort of premise of the blog post that I wrote, knowing what you're measuring and knowing what your success is and what you're looking at. It's not necessarily the headline numbers of XG or shots on goal or final third progressions. Get a little bit more into the weeds. Find things that are specific to you. Find things that are a little bit different to what everyone else is looking at. And that's where you can get a little bit of an edge.
Yeah, great topic. We kind of got moved away, but like I love this here where, there's a skill of being a data analyst, to connecting, similar to being a video analyst, connecting with staff and trying to see it from their perspective. And, I see Italia 90 and I see R9 Ronaldo there behind you. So like, you're obviously someone who enjoys an element of the game the way a coach would. How would you say then, maybe someone who's coming at it from a pure, numerical genius, data science, Harvard, all these Ivy League schools, like, is it a challenge in your eyes to see that, where you do understand the numbers, but maybe you don't understand the kind of reality of the chaos of the game?
I think it depends on the individual. There's certainly people out there that are using data and are these Harvard, whoever it might be, data scientists that maybe don't understand the game, and there's some that do. I think in the bigger organizations or the bigger clubs that have got the resources, there's increasingly becoming a role where there's somebody who sits between the two, somebody who understands the data science part, but can't necessarily do all the intricacies of it, but also understands football to a degree, and almost like an interpreter in between the data, the heavy data guys and the heavy football guys. But yeah, I think there's been a coming together over the years of, you'll know better than me, but football people are becoming more open to it. And I think the initial resistance of 10 years ago from your traditional football old school guys has dissipated a lot. And I think that's because people have started explaining it better. I think that wasn't necessarily old school against new school type thing. The new school guys had to think about how they were translating the insights, and having a level of understanding of both helps to bring it together.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point on the translator. We had a guest on a few months ago that talked on this topic and said that the closer you are to the communication process, then the more kind of football aligned you need to be, just because of that, again, almost the dialect of communicating football to football people. Even if the coach is modern and open-minded, being presented with data that tells you that you're not good at something isn't what people want every day of the week.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's also the thing. Like people have seen data as a stick to beat them with, and I don't think that's necessarily always the case. I mean, I'm sure people have used it in that way along the way, but I think using it as a way to inform your processes and inform whether what you're doing is working, whether you need to change things, and give you a bit of a more of an objective outlook. It helps in that way as well.
Oh, absolutely. I still think we're there, similar to data being perceived from a player standpoint to being used, if it's even if it's event data or physical data that's being used to say, all right, you're not covering enough ground. It's the kind of human mindset of, if we're trying to improve something, you have to highlight a weakness. So if you're trying to improve the team by 1%, there's no point in rolling up and saying, hey, you're really, really good at OBV. This is brilliant. But also the translation piece is sometimes that data analyst is translating from ownership, who is more data centric with financials and numbers. It's interesting.
Yeah, I think the way it depends who you're speaking to as well. Like the way you want to communicate findings to a sporting director might be different to the way you communicate them to a first team coach or a manager. It's just about knowing your audience and knowing who wants the information and what level of information they want and why they want it.
Yeah, it's a skill. Like it's.
I think so. Yeah, I think like even when we talked about OBV before, and I'm not suggesting I give the best explanation, but there's about 100 ways you could explain OBV, and some of them will resonate with certain people, and some of them will resonate with others. And again, it comes back to what you said about a relationship between the analyst and the coaching staff, and knowing how to speak to them, and knowing what level of communication, what level of insight, I guess, or what level of depth of the scientific part of it that you want to give to the coach, or you just say, look, it's a difference between how likely you are to score from this position versus this position, and then sometimes that just clicks it, and you're away from there.
Yeah, well, you've also got a generation of coach now that's more clued up with the conversations. So now they're sitting, that's got to be a factor. So now the grey is significantly increased. So the element of communication, even from, like, again, going back to StatsBomb, when I used StatsBomb, my two favorite things about StatsBomb was the glossary of definitions, which was I needed that a lot. But two was the radars, player radars, and comparing those there. But I actually did a presentation of this during the week about youth coaches, like, where's the game going to go? Eventually, people are going to be evaluating players from a more objective lens. But the consistency, and you might disagree with this, Jaymes, the consistency I saw with radars is that even the top players really, really good at something and really, really average or below average at something. So
yeah, it's just about contextualizing it as well, and knowing what a certain metric tells you, and also what it doesn't tell you. Like, it's not necessarily always more is better or less is worse type thing. There's a lot of grey areas around it as well, and knowing why a player performs poorly on a certain metric is almost as important as knowing whether he performs good or bad. If you use the data to ask you more questions, that's why the way I approach it. Okay, this player performs at this level for this metric. Why? And then if you can answer the question why, then that informs your sort of all round opinion of a player, especially in a recruitment perspective.
Brilliant. Last couple for you. What does a data analyst look like as an under 11 coach? Are you trying to fundraise for GPS and all for them?
No, I try to switch off. That's my weekend, to switch off from the data stuff. And although I can definitely say that when they're shooting from outside the box, it drives me mad. But apart from that, I'm trying to switch up from it.
Oh, brilliant! Yeah, I mean, when we're looking at where the game's going to go, which obviously is going to be really, really interesting. I mean, when do you think that, again, from a development standpoint, that the players of tomorrow are going to be sitting in front of a laptop with video, and everyone's like, oh yeah, that's going to happen. But a lot of that education is going to be, again, in mainstream Monday Night Football, but they're also going to be sitting in front of someone with a radar. And when do you think, again, just speculative, when do you think that should be introduced to them and kind of that aspect of the game?
You mean in terms of sort of age?
Yeah.
I think, yeah, it's a tough one. I don't like the idea of young kids being introduced to it, like from they can be aware of them and you can look at a radar for Haaland, but for their own performance, feel it might be a bit, what's the word? Destructive, I guess. Like it's not an encouragement. You don't want to have kids going out there at 11, 12, 13, 14 trying to think about, oh, my XG numbers need to get higher or my progressive third passes. I don't like the idea of that. I'm a big believer in just them trying to get them out there playing and a bit more freedom. You don't want that stress around that sort of thing. I guess that varies if you talk about working with elite kids and elite youth football. But no, I wouldn't be encouraging looking at it. Anything under like 16, 17. Once you get into under 18s, maybe there's a use for it.
Brilliant. All right, last one for you. Tomorrow I've given you a job. I've taken you from StatsBomb for triple your salary to come to a Premier League club as a director of football. Would you, because obviously on the topic of throws, we're going to work on it. Would you specialize in that kind of the long one if you had that, or would you say, listen, let's start at the halfway line and let's maximize that there from a personal point of view? Where would you see the greater value?
In terms of what we're working on in training, do you mean? Or?
Yeah. In terms of trying to get a return from it, yeah.
I think it depends what you've got in your club. If you've got a long thrower in there, I'd be pushing for trying to make some use of that. Not very few, but fewer teams than have longer throws in their game in their team than don't. So to leave that on the table and not be, if we've got a long throw and we're not throwing it into the box semi regularly, I'd be a little bit concerned. I think that's almost working at a disadvantage to something that you could be maximising. But yeah, more generally, I think it depends where we are. I don't want to go out and tell the coach to spend an hour a week working on throw-ins when we're getting beat 4-0 every week. Like if we're a decent team and we're up the top end of the table, and there's a suggestion that we could get an extra couple of percent out of the chances of winning a game from throw-ins, then yeah, I'd be encouraging it. But I'm not one for saying let's drop everything and work on throw-ins or set pieces.
Yeah, well, here's the $1 million one, and I'm only asking this because I don't know what interview it was, but I've listened to the lap. I think it was Under the Cosh he might have been on, and he talked about how it was kind of a fluke how he was found. He was throwing something, but it wasn't like a throw-in competition. So again, something we don't talk about as coaches is how do you find someone? Now, if I buy the lap from Stoke, I kind of know now, but a lot of levels, people don't know if someone has the capabilities of a long throw. Would you measure that on one day, on your first day?
Yeah, I wouldn't be against it. I don't think make it a bit of fun. Let's have a throwing competition, see who can throw it the furthest. And if somebody happens to be an absolute rocket launcher and can chuck it half the length of the pitch, then we're starting to use that, right? I'd be up for at least finding out if you've got a long thrower in your team. I wouldn't just assume that nobody can throw it because nobody has.
Yeah, brilliant. Great way to finish it. Jaymes, whenever throw-ins take off in the next 5 to 10 years, people will refer to this podcast as the change. Thank you so much for coming on. Really, really appreciate it. Great work.
Cheers, Gary. Pleasure.